Let's start. So, hi everyone, welcome to this webinar, which is going to be about Postman or about experts, we'll see. It is going to be about testing though. I wanted to do this session for a while now because I've been teaching courses in Postman and doing workshops and helping people work with Postman and test APIs. And there's a lot of emphasis about what the tool does. So this session is going to be about how to use the tool, not features in the tool. I'm going to assume like you know what Postman is. I'm going to show you a wee bit of introduction in the beginning, but after that, we're going to dive into actually how to use it for our sake, what we want to do. Rules of the game, probably not going to be able to answer questions as you go, but put them in the Q&A box. And people who don't know about Postman are going to be introduced to Postman and see what it's able to do. Again, what is most important for me is to share with you how it fits our testing process rather than what it actually does and how it does it. Full documentation, I like it comes with full documentation, very helpful examples. Maybe we'll do a separate intro to Postman. I actually do a whole workshop about introduction to Postman and testing APIs with that, which I'm probably going to repeat that during this session. But I'm going to show a bit of an introduction of what it does and why you want to have it in your arsenal. Okay, who am I? My name is Gil. I'm a trainer and a consultant about development, testing, management, product, anything that is coming around and going into working better software. I'm the author of 2 books, Everyday Unit Testing and Everyday Spring Testing. And actually, and you can get in touch with me here, even on Twitter, because I'm still on Twitter. I'm not sure what's going to happen the next few weeks, but still there, Gil_Zilberfeld. Okay, so a lot of development today goes into APIs. It's like becoming the best Lego piece around that we kind of build and toss around and compound and microservices and stuff like that. And everything's built around that. Much like this house, by the way. So obviously, if this is like has become the unit of our basically development, we need to test it because we don't want our application to actually be released in this state. So Postman has become like a very prominent tool for testing APIs. It's not actually for testing, but I'm going to talk about that, but it's more of an operation. So API is something that you can call, and then you get a response. And then you can check if the response is up to your expectation. So I'm going to switch to Postman for a few seconds to show you what it's all about. So this is Postman. Basically, it's a tool for making requests, API requests. So here's an example. And what I like about Postman very much is it's very visual. You see all of the things. So this is where you see like I'm making a post request to this API. I'm going to use for most of the demos Evil Testers, Alan Richardson's great tool for API challenges. You can look it up. It's very cool for practicing stuff. It's live. And I'm going to use it to doing some post and gets, maybe a delete auto, but that's okay. So basically, it's an application for creating to-do items. So you put in the URL, you want. You can put on the parameters here. It translates from the query params to the URL or backwards. You can put in the body that you want, and basically I'm setting this body as a text, and when I'm sending it, there's going to be an answer, a response. It comes as a JSON. You can see everything like is very organized. You have like the status code that was returned, created, 201, how much time it took, with a lot of features in it. And like, this is very useful as it is, but you probably want to say, well, I want to do something more with it. And like, if you run it between if you run as a workflow, or what this is called as a collection, you can run not just one, but run a whole collection of things. So this is how I'm creating and getting something. You don't see it much. The create is the post that I showed you. And what I'm running after this request, and Postman allows me to do, is called a test. We'll talk about that. But I'm storing basically the ID in a variable, and I can use this variable in the next request, which is get. So I can use ID equals the ID. And this is how I can chain together stuff. And this is very helpful, because if I want to run multiple requests, as applications do, this is very useful. I can do this in Postman. We'll talk about that very seriously, because this is where Postman believes you should live. I can do it also on my computer, because I can export this stuff. Export, and it exports as a JSON file like this. What I showed you now was 02, and I can go into a command line, and using an application, a node application called Newman, I can run this collection as well on my command line. And you see what executed request, so on. And this means I can tie it into my continuous integration, the Jenkins or something like that, to run this automatically, not just inside Postman. So like, this is very brief, not all the features that are in Postman, but it's enough to like get you familiarized with what you can do, because what I'm going to talk about next is what you can do with it in your life rather than punch URLs. So let's get back to this. So yeah, APIs are meant to be called. Postman allows you to do this. It allows you to do requests. It could be like REST APIs or web services. Can do a lot of things. It can do it gives us the opportunity to run code, JavaScript code, before the request, after the request. We'll talk about that as well. Testing for us, for our purpose, or automated testing, means that we're going to run this request, and we're going to look at what we got and see if what we got is what we expected. And I'm going to start our tips with talking about, tips. I'm going to talk about tips. Before that, like I said, there's a whole workshop I do in testing APIs with Postman. If you were interested in that, leave me a note in the chat or QA window, or gil@testinggil.com. Going to be there. So let's talk about what you're here for, the tips. I'm going to start with talking about not Postman, but the APIs themselves. And a lot of the time I see in development teams is that someone develops the APIs or defines them. It could be like product or the development teams, and then they're giving this in terms of documentation, Swagger or I don't know, paper to the tester, and they say, well, test it. And you look at the definition of the APIs, just like I showed you inside Postman, and it looks like you're testing a black box, but it's not like that. If you would actually test it like a black box, we're missing on a lot of things. So we need to know the API. We need to understand it, what it does. An example, I showed you the API for create. Let's look at another one. So yeah, let's look at this one. So I have two APIs here. The first one is create. The second one deletes it. Okay, so the create returns create a to-do. I'm storing the ID that I got for the to-do, and then I'm calling delete. Delete. This is how you delete stuff on this server. So there are different cases of delete. Okay. First of all, I showed you like a dependency. I'm assuming in this scenario that post, the create item will be run before the delete, but I can call the delete without the create. So there is a context here of dependency, what I'm calling before, what I'm calling after. What if someone calls the delete but doesn't have permission? It will look exactly the same way, but there will be a different result. And I need to understand what the context of running is, because let's assume I'm a user that have permissions that I can call the delete. Therefore, I'm going to be able to delete my item. Somebody else without permissions calls the delete, cannot do this. How does this happen? Is this happening inside the application, or maybe there's a gateway that doesn't allow the invalid user to even get in and call this API at all? And what does this mean about this API? What about like create and delete? Not by the same user. Does it have the same context? Do we expect the same behavior? We need to understand what's happening inside the code or the design of the application. One API and just calling it the delete works doesn't cover the entire cases. This is for just one single API. I can just go thinking about all kinds of cases that can happen. Multiple calls to the same delete. Who comes in first? Who succeeds? A time-based thing. We're just out of daylight saving time, right? So what happens when I'm creating the API, created the item? Time goes back 1 hour, then I'm calling the delete. Will it work? Will it not work? I need to understand not just the signature of the API, or how you call it, or the, let's call the documentation of the signature of the API. I need to understand what's going on behind it and how it's built. Otherwise, I'm going to miss out on a lot of cases that may be interesting, important, or I wouldn't even know that they exist. I need to know more. And this is how understanding the APIs really is important. So it's not like just getting a description of Swagger and that's it. Okay, next thing. So next thing is this is the delete stuff. Don't forget what I showed you. Yeah, let's talk about design. I usually talk about test design, test planning, like two separate but connected things. That test planning for me is where you just throw out on the wall different things that you might want to check or test. And out of this very big bowl of something, you'll select, well, I'm going to concentrate and focus on these things today. So this is like prioritization. And I put that in a bucket of test planning. Then comes the test design. So how am I going to check this behavior? And I can do a lot of things, hopefully not as badly as it's done in this picture in terms of design. So when I'm thinking about test design, testing the APIs, I'm thinking about, well, what kind of setup, what kind of an environment? So let's say I have an API, and this is the only one I'm not going to show you an example because it's more sophisticated than an example here. So I have some logic inside an API. Okay, and I want to check it, and you tell me, well, check the API. It will go through this logic. But what kind of setup do I need to do? So let's say I have this logic with an if and else inside it. So I need two cases, right? One with the if, one with the else. But the more complex the logic, I need to invest more in setup. If my code calls an API, calls a database or another API, I need to set up things in order for them to go through this loop and give me the information that I need. If I need a database, I need to set it up for the if with one set of data and for the else with another set of data. So that's time, that's cost. Maybe, not sure, a unit test without a database is better. And this is where test design comes. How am I going to check this code? I can do like everything. Let's say I have this database thing. I'm checking this API not to check that my API works with a database. I want to learn and believe that it does, but I'm checking my logic of the code. In that case, I want to check the integration, but I don't want my test to fail on connectivity issues, right? Because if it's going to fail, I want it to fail on the logic. Again, this is part of the test design. I'm thinking about what do I want from this test. So if that's the case, maybe run the database not on a separate server where connectivity issues can come, or only on a local machine, or like the same machine where the logic runs, or even in memory, in process. This is test design. So we're thinking about what kind of setup we need, what kind of environment we need, what needs to be controlled. We talked about time, date, data. If you're running against database, right? So what kind of data needs to be there for which scenario? If we're starting something from scratch, we need data to be cleaned. If we're starting from a user already exists, we need setup for the data that the user does exist. All these are part of the test design. We're thinking about how we're going to set up the scenario and how we're going to check that everything is okay and nothing bothers me, and it's not going to fail on something that I don't want it to fail. We want our tests to be repeatable, meaning it's going to succeed unless I want it to, it fails on what I want it to fail. Obviously, setup is not the only thing. Cleanup is the same thing, right? We want to make sure that things are fresh for the next API we're going to run, because otherwise we can't really commit for the order unless we're going to really manage everything inside every collection in any workspace. We're not going to do that. Next, we're going to decide where we're going to set up things, because we can set up things from inside Postman scripts. I'm going to show you examples of that, but we can also set up outside of Postman. Like we can set up the database from Jenkins before we start running things. Again, parts of the design. The before request or collection is inside Postman. We'll get to that. And make sure you're, when thinking about setup and cleanup, how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to be fragile, what you need to do it in order to get these scenarios, because like everything we do, it's coding, it's testing, anything that we do, if it's going to cost too much, we're probably not going to do it. And with testing, it's very important because we actually want to do it. So we need to be aware of how things are built. We decide. Okay, next thing. A part of thinking about this like setup and clean up things, mostly setup, and I mentioned the cost, how much it costs. You probably want to do something, run as a bunch of requests or collections with the same setup if it costs you so much. It's not just the cost of effort, because you're going to write it. But well, let's say that you're going to like load a database, like you need to connect to a database, which takes time, and load the data in. So you want to group things functionally, but also based on setup and performance. So grouping is very important, and we're thinking about how to organize stuff in different collections, different folders. We need to split stuff. Let's look at an example. So this is like an example I mentioned before. We can do it functionally, no user exists, or for existing items. So when the no user exists, I create a folder. It's like collection can have folders within folders, and it runs a request of create and get. And then there's another folder which starts for existing items because it assumes there's going to be a user there. Now, functionally, well, first of all, the APIs, same API, it's a get. But here I'm creating the item. Here I'm assuming it's there. Can I assume it's there? No, I need to actually make sure it's there. But in terms of running, I want to be able to run this thing by itself and not always after this thing, the way that if I run the whole entire collection, this is how it will work. So my flexibility and my sort of isolation between folders and different requests needs to become maybe part of my design, and it actually translates into the organization inside the workspace. When I group things together, they need to make sense for both setup, starting point, and also my ability to run them separately. If I don't do this, like they become dependent on each other, and that means, first of all, things can, I will have to work very hard to run different scenarios, and it will be hard to like thread the needle between all of them. But the more important stuff, when I want to run very small specific things, which makes sense for me, it's easier to debug. When I do that, I need this kind of separation and isolation. So organization of folders and collections is very important. Think about it. Group smart. Okay, so environments. I showed you an example of a variable, how to store something within a request or the end of the request in order to use it in the next one. So that's a collection variable. It's called, Postman has all kinds of variables in it. And something is called an environment variable. So basically, an environment in Postman means a set of variables. I know it's not very interesting by itself, but think about it this way. Let me show you an example. So let me close that. Talk about environment. So this is an API, the create API. Only I'm using here the server, and you can see that this is like bright red, unresolved variable. It doesn't know what server is, but I can change the environment within Postman. What is an environment? So I created local endpoint environment. Let's look at those. So you can, apart from collections, you have environments, and you can have global, like everything within the workspace and shared across collections. That's cool. But I can create different separate environments where variables will be active or inactive. What I did is created a server variable, which runs on localhost, and a prod with the same variable name, which goes into production. This way, let me go back into my collection. When I'm running without an environment, it will not run. But if I'm running within a local environment, what will happen is it would go to the local host. If I'm changing it to prod environment, production, it will go to production. Now, this is a very simple way, by setting the same variable name and give it different values in different environments. And I can do that also from the command line or Jenkins or whatever. It's a very nice way to run different APIs that I've created once and test it on different environments. There's one catch though. So this is not interesting. The cool thing, but the same thing, we are expecting the same behavior. And this is like where it kind of gets messy. So let's assume that you do the create and get. And in the get, you do a test that what you got is the right thing. Okay, is that true always on both environments? We need to think about it. Maybe when we're running on a local environment, we get back dummy data. So we can check against this dummy data and assert that what we got is what we expected. But when we're running on production level, maybe we get data that we didn't expect. So the create always creates something that something new. So I'm not sure if I get it back is what I expect or not. So we need to be aware that the playing with this kind of environment variables, it's okay, and this is probably it's very useful to do like the run once, write once, run many, but we need to be to make sure that the behavior that we expect is going to be the same thing. Otherwise, we need separate tests. There's a question: environments are global merged with other selected environment, or is it either global or selected environment? No, global can work with environment. It's very confusing, by the way. So you can use global variables, like for the entire collection, and then you can use them in different environments. So you can like merge them together. The confusing part is when you're using things with the same name. So don't do that. Okay, let's get back to Greta and continue to the next thing. Names. Names are cool. Okay, so Postman allows us to do one of the features that it does. I'm going to like look at my names here. So like you can look at this and you see the description here is something that I've given it. And the content, what it actually runs, the post and the URL and the body is separate. So I can give it different names. Now, a lot of times what you would write is like this post request or post to do or create to do, something like that. Only you can use the same requests in different contexts. And therefore, when you can use the description to give it a proper name. So let's look at this. So if you're running, let's talk about the delete, right? So this is the delete, same delete. If you do it by the request by itself, you can write like delete to do single call or something like that. It makes sense. But within a workflow, it can change. So this would be like a create running in after create to do item, and then deleted created item. And this one should created item should succeed. So I'm actually in the test itself I'm running. After that, delete was successful. So I'm checking that it got me a 200. But I can do even more than that. Let's say, actually interested in creating and then checking that the delete succeeded. And if I'm running the same delete with the same idea, same ID, it should fail, right? So same ID, same API, but this time I'm going to make sure that it fails. So I'm giving it a different description that it kind of hides from me. But same request, same API, same variable. It's completely the same, but I'm expecting different result. I can put it in the name. Why would I do that? Well, remember that as I'm working on it, I can flip it and go into this test tab and see what it's actually checking. But in automation, when you run it like in CI or something there, you won't be looking at the code. So if you want to differentiate stuff, and requests have context when they're running, after what they're running, before what they're running, what is the meaning of delete in which context, you want to emphasize that. So if something fails, you want to make sure that you've given enough description before we're actually looking at what the test does. So use names, use proper names, and use them in context, because it will make your life easier when something breaks. Halfway. Okay. Testing means, automate testing means that you're going to check at the end something happened, and it will give you an indication of either something worked or not. We call this asserts in JavaScript, and in Postman it's called expects. But you specify your pass-fail criteria. And we can do this like in a broad range, or we can do it specifically, and the more accurate, more precisely we do this, it will tell us that what went wrong, and therefore it's not our job to fail something. Our job is to make sure something like pop up and say, this is what it failed on, now go fix it. And the more precise the description, we'll be able to do that more quickly, and this is what we want. Code working quickly. So let's look at examples. Close this, look at assert. So remember, what we're looking at is what happens after the request. We can run code like that after each request. So this is the create one. Basically, what I'm doing here is I'm passing the ID from the response, putting it in a variable. I'm going to use it later, but I can write for this create a test that it actually got 201, created status. This is like documented stuff. I can check that it did that. Now, do I need this here? I'm not sure, because if it really depends, we can spend a lot of time. We may want it here, but basically, if this wasn't created, we're going to fail on the get, right? So the test by itself may give us information that we may need or may not need. It also may be like time intensive. So, but we need to think about what we're testing. Okay, let's look at the get. So we created something. Now we get the value. Let's look at what kind of options we have here. So the first test is checking that we got a 200. Is this what makes a get successful? Well, part of it, yes, got 200, it's okay. But we want to check other things as well. Let's run let's run this. I want to show you what actually happened. So when I'm going to run the get with the variable, need to run the create first. I'm going to run the entire folder here just to make sure that it actually works. So run the create, then I get an ID, 340, run this again. So what I get, basically, this is the JSON I get as a response in the body. I get an array of to-dos. Within it, there's one item of to-do with these fields. Okay, what can I check? So first of all, I can check that I got a to-dos and the array is of size 1. It's true, it passes the test, but it's not precise. It's not what I want. And you think about what you actually want. I can check the to-do that got in, and within it, I can check different fields. Now, I don't have to check everything. Now, this is an example where the done status, what the field at the bottom, is not updated unless I put it there. So for me, it's not important. You can think about these fields like in an extreme case where you have like a timestamp. Every time you go and create something, another timestamp arrives. You can check that it's newer, but it's probably not going to be given enough information whether that this is what you want it to fail or pass. So you need to think about what kind of fields interested you and how you narrow the fields in order to make sure that you tell the developer or somebody else that this is working or not. On the other extreme case, if you actually make sure that there is a response body and it's not null, yes, it will pass the test, but it's not precise. It doesn't give you anything. So make sure you create tests that are precise. I'll hang on to these questions for later. So name, we talked about name being very specific because this is where you're actually going to understand what's going on. The asserts, the expects are very, very important as well because you want to make sure that they tell you exactly where the problem is. And that also comes if you've written code like in JUnit or something like that, or rest assured, inside, not inside Postman, but other frameworks as well, or Jasmine, it doesn't really matter. You have to take these things as well into consideration. Okay, this is something that I see a lot, and I want to mention that of not how to do that, how not to do this. So you get a set of APIs, and the developers tell you, well, check it, and you want to check it. You're going to write tests, and then what you're doing is basically get like, for example, what we have here is a CRUD thing, right? Create, get, update, and delete. You do this like this. I'm going to show you. So you write a workflow where create, get, and delete. Makes sense, right? Well, if you think about it like in regular things, yeah, it makes sense, but this is not how it's going to be run in real world. In the real world, it's going to be create and get, probably. And separately, you probably want get and delete. You probably won't get create, get, and delete at the same workflow in the real world. You probably don't do that a lot. Now, what happened here? And why is that a problem? The problem is that when tests are passing, they kind of raise our confidence. This is why we're building tests. This is why we run tests. And if something is passing, we say, so this will probably work next in pre-production or production or whatever. So if this is running, I can say, well, at least in my brain, it says, well, these APIs will work in production the same way it works here. Only this is not how it's going to be run in production. So I need to understand in the workflows that I'm building how it's going to be run in production. Otherwise, I'm kind of building my confidence that this is working, but I'm not checking it the way it's going to be run there. So try to be as real. Where's Kermit? As real as possible, and that means that a lot of the times I tell people, like, go to the end-to-end or the manual testing script and kind of scrape from there which APIs are going to be run in what sequence, because this is how it's going to be actually run. If this is what you need to make sure that actually works. Keep it real. Exploring. So there's a whole webinar I did about exploration, API exploration in Postman, by the way. So I encourage you to go to the site and everydayunitesting.com or testingguild.com on the YouTube channel and check it out. I did a lot of things going in terms of exploration. I'll give you a small excerpt of that, which makes it interesting why exploring APIs is important. So in this webinar, and this is the only thing I'm going to use from that webinar and different API, I went to the ST API, which is a Star Trek API because Star Trek, and I checked this search API, and this is the API I decided to explore. So the whole webinar is working on this API. And what you see is the one thing I started with, like search on a name of Spock. And if I run this, you'll see that what comes back is a whole bunch of JSON, and it's interesting because it kind of finds, I think, 5 records of Spock. And part of the exploration, there are different Spocks in Star Trek. And what I did, well, I started working with that in different cases. So I said, if I want to find Spock from the voyage home, let's try giving it a title, a partial title called Voyage, and the name. And part of the exploration is running this. You run this, you get the same result. So there's a partial, at least when I search for partial voyage instead of the voyage home with Spock, I didn't find the specific Spock. That's cool. And what I said there, well, maybe I need to do the entire title. But what I did there was I made a mistake. So this is like the voyage home, only you see that here there's a whole space. I missed the 20 here. And when we run this is what we get. First of all, we get a 500, which is an internal server. And then you get something very interesting. You get like a Java runtime exception and some internal error. And it's interesting. Why is it interesting? Because I just learned, for example, don't have any connection to this server. It's built in Java. I can learn all kind of things, and I learned that we can break it if we give it. It doesn't handle well something with that it doesn't understand, like a character that it doesn't understand. Now, maybe it's not that important in this context, but maybe there are contexts where these things happen. So you can use Postman not just for automating requests. You can. But you can also for exploration, and you'll find very interesting things based on your knowledge of how developers work. And as a developer, I can tell you, we try, but we don't cover every cases. So you can use Postman as well for testing, exploratory testing for APIs. Where are we? 8, 9. Okay, so when I first started seeing that, I said that like these people are crazy, but probably not many of them. Fortunately, there are. Postman allows me to write code like JavaScript that I showed you before and after the request. Other cases as well, like before a collection or after the collection or a folder within it. But I can write a lot of code, and you saw that the code looks like what it looks like, right? It looks like, where's the test? Doesn't look too frightful, right? But it can be, and even has some highlighting. But I saw like big chunks of code written here, and that's a problem because first of all, Postman is not an IDE. It's not a development environment. You can't debug in it. Well, you need to log the stuff. You can't share code except for what I'm going to show you in a minute. And you can't jump between things, and you can override things. And there's a lot of like jumping through hoops if you actually want to do this, a lot of coding. So here's an example. I'm going to shut this down. How to reuse a function. You can do that. So look at this. I'm using, in my test, my post request code, have a utils parse JSON function. Where is it defined? I can define this in a pre-request of the collection. So I'm defining a utils namespace, and it has a parse JSON method, and I can use that across the collection, which is cool. But what happens if I want to do that across collection or across workspaces? This is not a development environment. It's not an IDE. You can override stuff, you can write over stuff, and it's hard to maintain this code. So the tip here is don't write too much code. Well, you ask, well, what do I do if I need code outside? Well, we can call out, and this is where I'm going to show you the next almost final tip. And this is where you need to understand the sandbox. So apart from Postman not being an IDE, a development environment, it sort of gives us an environment to run the APIs, but not a complete one. So Postman basically is a service, is a software as a service, and it runs somewhere in the cloud, somebody else's computer, which means not on my computer. So if I have files on my computer that I need access, I need to upload them into the cloud. The idea is that when Postman is running, it's going to run in safe mode with no access to anything. And it's called a sandbox. It's designed by this way, and it actually limits the way I am going to work because my access to things is minimal. What can I do? Well, I can do this. Where is it? So this. So Postman allows me to send a request as part of my code before or after request or before or after collection. Everything still applies at all the different levels. This is how it looks like. So this is where I get the item, but in order to do this, I want to create the item first. So I needed to call out to a server. This is the only options I have. And this server, this example, I'm just calling the post, the create from before. All you can see that, well, why would I do this? Well, I probably wouldn't do this unless then the server that I need to call is something that I need for development, like load up the database. So it will be something that I need to set up, server. It needs to be online forever because I don't know where this actually going to be run. And I'm going to need to check that it's all working and maintain that code and as well. And it needs to be everywhere. But this is the sandbox. This is how it's working. After that, I can check what happened, right? Same get from before. But the way send request works is the only option sandbox gives you in order to get to file, access database and stuff like that. And as you can see, like this is like could be a line in Postman, but this is like a big chunk of data of code just for running a request. And this is when you start thinking about this is how things are starting to pile up. So you need to understand the limitation of Postman, what it gives you in terms of this, and how you may want to work around it. Like, don't do this, or call the database from inside Postman. Do it from the outside, like as part of a setup script in your CI. It's probably better. So I talked about the different things that Postman allows, how it supports our process of testing and our thinking about testing, but I want to give you another final thing, which may be a bit controversial, which is maybe don't use Postman. So hear me out. Postman has a way of working when it kind of conflicts with the way we work. Why is that? Well, as long as you're within Postman world, it's okay. But our code, our API code, our development code, production code is not there. So let's say we have like code of an API and we raise its version, new version. And now we need to raise our tests for another version. If you want to reproduce this, you need to work very hard because you can't put a label or on the Postman directly, which you would very easily do if you had like your test under your same project. You can do that, but you need to export this like I did and showed you at the beginning, but then you need to export every time you actually do that, and you need to remember doing that. So it's hard. It's work. We're starting to like work for the tool instead of the tool working for us. What are the options for that? For example, you can like write tests in Rest Assured or something like that, JUnit, or use Insomnia, which is another alternative, open source alternative for Postman. There are alternatives. What's the point here? The point here is that it needs to fit with the tools that we use, and that's not just Postman, right? It needs to fit, every tool that we use needs to fit in the way we work. If it doesn't, we're going to start making concessions in terms of quality, in maintenance, and things that are not, we're going to bend the way we work in order to do that. That's true for databases, that's true for frameworks, that's true for everything. But this webinar is about Postman. So what am I saying? I'm not saying don't work with it, although I did say that. But apart from that, when you look at the tool or any tool in Postman in this context, see how much it fits your entire development process. Not just calling APIs. It's very good at doing that. But like I showed you, there are many things that you can do within it that can enhance your experience as testers. But at some point, it stops doing that, and in some cases becomes a liability. Like it looks like you can put a lot of code in there. It's not going to, and it may even work, but it's going to be hard maintaining this code, and you're going to have a lot of duplications and duplication of bugs. You don't want that. And then you look at the alternatives of what you can do, and there's not much. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of integration pains, not of the production code, but integration into your development process. So think about it, see if it fits your experience, and I hope you enjoyed it. Summarizing, Postman's a very good tool. It visualizes a lot of stuff and allows you to do all kinds of stuff with every option of headers and authorization, everything. But this is when you look at it like up close at what you can do per request. When you're talking about, does it fit the way we work? You need to be the judge of that. So make sure that you choose tools and think about looking at Postman in this kind of way. You need to make sure that you're not wasting time on how the tool wants it to work, rather than make sure that the tool works the way you want it to work. And you can decide whether the gap between that thing is worth working with it, or you can choose other tools, look at other tools. That's okay too. Not sure the Postman people will like it, but they're just one tool vendor. Think about how tools affect your entire process. And this is what I wanted to share with you today. So remember, there's a course for that, a whole workshop on Postman APIs testing that I give. If you're interested, let me know. Questions, put them in the questions. This is, by the way, how you get to ask questions when I'm not here. So I answered that one. Let's see. Can I use the same request in 50% of my tests folders, but actually when I want to update my request, I have to go to all the tests that use the same request and update it. Can I have the request in one place only, but to use it in 50% of my tests? You can put like the thing, a request in a variable and evaluate it, or put it in a code like in a pre-request when I told you, or you can reorganize it in a different way. Postman allows you very easily to duplicate stuff. Reuse stuff is something else. Again, it's not an IDE. It's not like you're writing a function that you can call. So even if you want to reuse stuff, what are you exactly reusing? just the URL. Now we're talking about the headers and the body and how you handle the response and the test and the pull requests as well. So whenever you're doing that, what you're actually reusing is the whole thing. It doesn't really help you to do that very easily. So you can like call the send request and put it in a join place. Not ideal in terms of coding. Test sequence in a folder. Can one insert placeholders, reminders, nope steps that are not a request to help organize a folder of tests and make it more readable? Like null requests. Interesting. I haven't tried it. The smallest part of Postman is like a request. So it could be like you can put something in it like a dummy request, but it needs to go somewhere, because when you run it, you can put it there manually and not do anything, but at the end you probably want this collection to run and it needs to be a request. So there's going to be like a valid URL here there. So if this is what you need to do, I think you'll probably work very hard in order to achieve it. So I'm not sure like doing the a nope thing. You can put like an empty folder with a name. This could be like a comment inside it. But like us developers always say, but then somebody stupid will go on and put something in that folder. Not us, of course, because we're smart. So it's not built for that. So again, you probably find something to do to work around it, like the empty folder thing. It's not ideal. Not ideal in that kind of scenario. Data driven. Yes. Can't show you a demo, but there's something called a data-driven feature where you can go into a collection, and when you're going to run it, you see it has, you can't see it right now. You can run something, you need a separate collection for that. It has to be a separate collection from other things, and you need to specify variables. Let me see if I can cheat my way through it with the environments. It will not will not work, but okay, because the environment have something in it. See, when I'm running without an environment, it doesn't identify this. So maybe if I run this, it will say, well, I'll probably need it from the outside. Let's see if I can run. You see there's a select file here. And this allows you to load up a CSV. And you can, this CSV, you can like comma separated values. Each column will be the variable name. So it can actually fit in values from this CSV. So you can run a collection multiple times with different values. Again, it has to be like same behavior that you're going to check. So you probably want to supply the results, the expected results as well. It's possible you can export this collection and run and specify in the command line when you're running what kind of thing you're actually running, the values itself, where to get it. But this again exemplifies what I'm saying. You kind of going around a Postman in order to run things that come from the outside. So it is possible. It's useful. But again, it needs management, because these values that you're going to use are going to be, you're going to want to version them as well. So yeah, it's there. Look for it in the documentation. See if it fits what you actually need. Don't look at features like, ooh, shiny, but does it fit the way I work? Okay. We're going to finish today. Thank you very much for joining in. Look out for other webinars that are going to be out soon. And we're going to have this recording up somewhere in the near future. Thanks for coming. Hope to see you in the next webinars as well. And good night or good morning or continuation of the day. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share and subscribe for more. Thanks for the support and remember, live long and test.